So anyway, thank you for joining the second session of 50 Ways to Fight Bias. This is in support of the Women's Leadership Group, and everybody from that group has been invited to this and has been asked if they feel somebody else wouldn't be benefit. It would benefit somebody else than to just forward it on. Plus, we have a number of advocates, so this is not just a female-only type of session. So Elba is here with us. She is the founder and president of ShowMe50. ShowMe50's mission is to fight for 50% of leadership C-level positions that will be female. So anyway, with that, Elba, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to start us with our second session.
Great. Thank you so much, Diane. Appreciate all the support you've given me. She is such a supporter of a more inclusive workplace. So TireHub is fortunate to have Diane in her role. Thank you everyone for joining. We are going to go ahead and get started. I hope you've had a last couple of weeks that were productive, and we are moving fast toward putting 2020 behind us. So I know everybody's excited as much as I am. So here's the agenda of what we're going to cover today. We're going to have a quick recap of session 1. So even if you weren't able to make it before, you'll get a glimpse of what we covered, and it'll be a review for everyone. I also have one new video, which was an outcome of some feedback we had last time. We are also going to talk about your one action. Common biases, we covered several last time. We'll cover one more. We'll do an icebreaker, and we'll go through those situation cards, which really I find are the most applicable, practical ways for us to become more informed and more inclusive on our teams. And then we'll wrap it up. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So I want to mention our last session was on November 19th, and Diane has sent you out a recap. And again, I just want to thank you. I thought it was a great session, and we also provided a link to the recording of session 1 in that email. So be on the lookout for that. So here's the recap that we're going to have. Last time we talked about where this program came from, 50 Ways to Fight Bias, and we're going to have an interactive session again this time. So please, we're going to have some polls, and we're going to use the chat feature. So if you haven't opened your chat, make sure you do. You can do the Alt button and the H, and that opens your chat, or you can look for the ... more feature on your command panel from Zoom, and you should see where it says chat, Alt H or chat. So let's start with a question. Real quick, do you remember last time we watched a video that shared with us how this program was compiled, and it came from a university? So let's use the chat. Does somebody remember which university in California sponsors and contributed to the creation of this 50 Ways to Fight Bias program? So use your chat feature. What college? Okay, we have one. Let's see if anybody else has any guesses. Come on, don't make me call people out, because I have your names, because on Zoom I can see your names. Any other guesses? Let's do this. How about if we ask, Diane is the one who answered, and she thinks it's Stanford. I'm going to pick on some people to ask you if you think that's right. Jessica Lee, do you think that Diane is right or wrong? Do a chat feature, or you can speak up by unmuting yourself. Come on, everybody. We got to get, I know it's toward the end of the week, but.
I'm going to go with, I think she is right.
Woo! Okay, Jessica and Diane, yes, you're both right. So it's Stanford University, and they set up a special research center called the VMware Women's Innovation Lab, and VMware is a great inclusive company, and so they are funding it. Okay, let's do next. Let's see here. Okay, the next thing I want to show you is that we talked a little bit about unconscious bias, and someone asked to explain unconscious bias, and I gave it my best shot. And then I came across this video. So I want us to watch this video, which does a real nice job of really summarizing unconscious bias with pictures, and it's easy to follow. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play, and we're going to watch this video. Turn up your volume.
New research from the fields of neuroscience and social psychology has shed light onto the concept of unconscious bias. But what exactly is unconscious bias, and how does it affect our behaviors and decisions? Unconscious biases are simply our unintended people preferences. They are formed by our socialization, our personal experiences, and the representations of different groups in the media. These experiences act as social filters in which we make assessments and judgments of people around us. Research tells us that human beings have a natural tendency to place individuals into social categories. These categories are often based on visual cues such as gender, cultural background, age, height, or body size. We also categorize based on social background, job roles, religious identity, or political affiliation. The unconscious brain uses associations based on social categories to develop biases. For example, if we are constantly exposed to women as primary school teachers or receptionists, or men as plumbers and organizational leaders, these associations become wired within the human brain. The unconscious brain uses social categories to make unconscious judgments about people who are similar to us and people who are different from us. A common form of unconscious bias is affinity bias. This type of bias impacts talent processes in organizational decision-making, including how we recruit. Managers are more likely to hire people who look similar or with sounding names to them. Work allocation. Managers are more likely to assign key client projects to individuals within their teams who they have an unconscious affinity with. Performance. Where there is some kind of affinity, managers are more likely to spend time informally discussing positive contributions to the team and will focus on development and future work plans. For those where there is little affinity, managers are more likely to question past performance. The conversation will be less friendly and even hostile at times. Unconscious bias often results in a set of micro-behaviors. Examples of positive micro-behaviors include supporting the ideas of someone with who you have an unconscious affinity whilst in a team meeting, or simply wanting to have coffee with someone like you. Examples of negative micro-behaviors include checking emails on your phone whilst talking to a colleague or cutting someone off in a meeting. Often our intention is not to make biased decisions, and through a focus on conscious thinking and by creating inclusive work cultures, we can learn to control our unconscious judgments and mitigate the impact of bias on our talent programs. For more
Okay, so I hope that you found that video helpful. I would encourage you, you'll receive a copy of this presentation deck again, and it will have the links in it just like the prior one. It's a great video to share. How about sharing it with your teams? Not even related directly to the women's leadership group, but just how about having team meetings where at the beginning, that was just a quick 3-minute video and you share information and it's a great talking point. So that's a review of something we talked about last time. Okay, another thing we talked about was the business case or the business performance and financial support for why more diverse organizations that are led by people who are diverse at the top, women and otherwise, there's actually research that shows that there is substantial benefit to the organization. So we covered a slide that has information on various studies. We also then went into a couple of facts about the representation of women in the different levels of management across organizations, and we covered the McKinsey and Lean In annual study of what's called the talent pipeline. And we had a poll where we found out, well, do people in companies actually see their own company's numbers? And most of the time they do not. So one way to mitigate the situation of unconscious bias is to be transparent about the numbers and just let people be aware, well, gosh, what are our representation numbers? We also talked about a couple of slides where we showed what it must be like to be the only woman in the room, or the only woman of color in the room, or the only person who was different in some way from the people in the room. And we showed this visual. And, you know, I have a quick question. In the video we just saw, one of the examples that they gave of microaggressions, I'm going to see who was paying attention. They gave some examples of what a microaggression is. And these are the ways that our unconscious mind perpetuates these biases, not even knowing it, right? And by the way, I also meant to say that this isn't about being good or bad people. We are all good people. It's about a system that we have difficult controlling, and it's called our unconscious brain. So I think we need to get comfortable just recognizing it's not something we do intentionally, it's unconscious, and we can help our organizations and create more inclusive workplaces if we're simply aware of it and we work hard to mitigate it. And so here's the test for you. One, in the video, they gave an example of unconscious behaviors. And in this image here, there's actually some of those behaviors. So somebody tell me, what was one microaggression from the video that is displayed here in this very image? Here you go. Thank you, Janet. Janet says, checking your phone while talking to someone, right? And so I think just a simple example of recognizing that as a microaggression and as ways that our subconscious mind is not including the person that we're in the room with is great. And it's a great learning. So I would challenge us all that next time we're going to look at our phone when someone is presenting, that you think about, hey, is this my unconscious mind saying I don't really, that person, I don't have an affinity with that person, so I don't really pay attention to them, right? So that's one simple thing. What's an action we can do? Thank you for participating there, Janet. Okay, and then we looked at this one, right? This woman told us what it's like to be the only Black woman and all the pressure she faces. And I pointed you out to a website that has some great information that you can read in private and learn and more. We also watched a video of a typical situation at work where we are evaluating employees and managers for greater responsibility, and the kinds of conversations that we have that are mental shortcuts, and we might jump to conclusions, and it's better if we have a good discussion about it. Also, in the last meeting, we covered these 3 biases that are shown on the screen: performance bias, affinity bias, and attribution bias. And we used the free online tool, which you should see on the screen there, where you can just click and you're able to do this maybe in your own staff meetings. Again, just for a few minutes every week, you have a discussion about each one of the biases. And so we covered those last time, and we're going to cover one more this time. The last couple of things we did was we did these icebreakers, and that's where we posed a question and we took a poll to see what the answer was. And so the 2 we did, this first one was, hey, what % of men and what % of women receive feedback, negative feedback on their personal style? And we discovered that only 1% of men receive that kind of feedback versus 66% of women. And the second poll we did was about, hey, what % of Black women never have an informal interaction with a senior leader? And we know that the way people build relationships and solve business problems is by actually having engagements with each other and developing trust and visibility. And if you don't even have an opportunity to have those informal engagements, you're already behind. And so it just opens our eyes to the fact that 59% of Black women never have an informal interaction with a senior leader. So what can we do? We can just be aware of that and say, hey, who's in my circle? Why are they in my circle? Can I include someone else just to say hello or grab a coffee together? And then lastly, we talked about one action. And so here's some more interaction. What I'd like to ask you all is, when we left the last meeting, we thought about what's one thing I can do differently now. And so I'd like to ask you, what were you able to do? Did you do anything from the class that you were able to apply? So let's, in the chat, if someone can just give me, one thing you did differently since our last meeting, even if it's, that you opened an article and read it, or that you invited someone to a meeting that you normally would not have invited to. I'd like to see if we have any kind of success stories, because those really help us to see what is we do. Because I don't want us to have these kind of conversations and then just have it end. How can we integrate it into our behaviors in very small ways? So is anybody willing to share what, did you do anything different at all to think about this unconscious bias? And it doesn't even have to only be around gender, right? But what can we do? What did we do? Let's see if anyone's willing to make a comment. Anybody have a success story? What did you do differently from last time? Did you read any articles? Did you maybe even click on the websites we covered? Did you maybe even just mention to some of your peers that you went to this work session? I don't see anything. I just want to make sure, Diane, do you see any comments? Otherwise, we'll move on.
No, there is
Here's
a
one.
comment. Yeah, paying attention to how many women, and especially women of color, are in meetings, everyday interactions, and had a great conversation with my boss about this session, and that's from Nicole Kraft.
Great. Thank you, Nicole, for being willing to share your experience. And I think that Nicole gives a great example, right? Because what we're talking about are just tiny things. Just like there's microaggressions, there's micro activities that we can do to grow and really help our teams grow and help our organization grow. And it is as simple as that you simply observed who's in the room now from now on. That's, you don't even have to do anything, but just, look around every time just so your own knowledge grows. And having a great conversation with your boss, right? And I would encourage you, have a conversation with your team. And maybe you could just show, for example, you could just show this single slide right here, right? And you just show this single slide and you can say, hey, listen, I attended this thing for 90 minutes. And I just want to show you two things we looked at, the representation of women and men by job and these biases. And you could even show them the link to the website that's free and invite them to go click on one. And then maybe at the next meeting, you talk about what they saw when they clicked on one of those 6. So thank you. And that's those are some ideas. Okay. So
I just wanted to chime in, if I may. One of the things that I was a little surprised by after the first session, and the attendees in the first session, there were males on it, and I see that we don't have any males on it today. But I was asked, why did you invite me to that session? And I said, because, we need advocates for, women in the workplace and to, support us. And if you have women, especially reporting to you, it's really important that you are aware of these unconscious bias and of this issue in general. Just not for women, but for people that are not the norm.
Yeah, absolutely, Diane. Thank you for that comment. And it is discouraging when we don't have men join the meetings because, quite frankly, the people who are running organizations, as we've seen from the chart of the representation of those, 300 million employees or 312 companies, is that men are running the companies and making strategic decisions, everything from how we operate and new products that we deploy, as well as who gets special career opportunities and promotions and job rotations. And so we need all of the leaders of companies to come and understand these unconscious biases and the way they weave themselves through the talent management system. And so I would encourage you, Diane, and everyone here, what can we do to encourage more men to join the conversation? And perhaps one way is to volunteer. It would be wonderful if you could volunteer with a man, but both of you show up to a staff meeting of a high level leader and you bring and present one of these cards and you show them the 50 Ways to Fight Bias tool. And you volunteer to share the information with them so they don't have to actually do anything, right? You're bringing the information to them. That could be helpful to get the conversation going. And when they see the interaction of employees, they may be more persuaded to see it as a team building and inclusion and engagement tool to improve the culture. Thank you a lot for sharing that. Does anybody else have any comments on how men and women can work together or need to work together? The other thing, Diane, I want to mention is it's pretty uncomfortable when you are with your company's employees, peers, and leaders to be bold and speak up about these topics. It's very uncomfortable. I just had a conversation just this morning with a white male peer who is just as frustrated as I am with the way that promotions are being are happening. And so he and I got to chatting, and I said, let's call him Dan. Dan, there's a lot of conversation about equity right now at companies. And if you are in the majority group, you might begin to feel like all of a sudden, you're never going to get promoted because all they're doing is promoting women and minorities. But when I had a conversation with him, we discovered that in fact, we're both looking for the same thing. All we're asking for is to compete on a level playing field so that all the jobs are posted, all the criteria for the jobs are made clear, and the decision makers have an interview of questions and rating structure so that all the people, regardless of gender or race or ethnicity, compete for that position, right? So we're not asking for special treatment, only equal treatment. So white men benefit too. White men benefit too when they can all compete. We can all compete. Okay, let's keep going. So we're gonna have, this is session 2. We're gonna start out with this icebreaker and we're gonna run a poll. And so we are gonna ask, last time we also talked about the Harvard implicit association test. And I believe someone talked about how they actually have participated in the test before. And so I found this question. I was like, oh, this will be a good one. So we're going to do a poll. And I'm going to launch the poll. So now you can vote. Natalie says 65. So here's the 3 choices. We're going to make it a little easier and make it multiple choice. So what % of people associate men with career and women with family? So men with career and women with family, what %? Let's have a few more people vote so it's not just all one-sided here. We want a good sample. So far, 60% of attendees have voted. We'll wait a couple more seconds. And 80% have voted. So let's see what the answer is. I'm going to share it with you. And you all answered, the majority of you answered at 76%. And that is the answer. So 76% of people associate men with career and women with family. And so let's have a conversation about that. How does that impact us and our career opportunities? What does that really mean? How does that translate to the kind of experiences that we have at work?
I think it means that women would be more likely to potentially be looked over for growth opportunities in career because of the association. Oh, they may not be interested, or oh, their focus is at home, or they're not here 100%. I doubt that a lot of that happens consciously, but I think subconsciously that happens mostly.
Yep, that's a great point. And who was that talking?
Nicole.
Nicole. Okay, Nicole, thank you. Sometimes I can't really see on my screen. Yeah, that's right. We may tend to be overlooked subconsciously, right? And so just like in that video, I thought it was so funny how every time he picked someone that looked just like him, right? That had the glasses on and dark skin. And so, yeah, we just subconsciously, we may not remember. We think career opportunity. Oh, John. Yep. Not taking us seriously, not considered. Go ahead.
So not even being taken seriously, but it's the amount of stress that we take in on ourselves, because I see this now more. I mean, my kids are older. It's just me. I don't have to worry about it. But even when my kids were home, you subconsciously create your schedule around what's good, what the rest of the family needs. And a lot of times you let stuff go by the wayside, that your responsibilities are left, but you feel guilty. You feel that you're not doing enough. And I see it now with my daughter, who's 28, 3 kids, and she's a very successful, she's a shop manager. She has her own store, and she in a corporation, but she has to work nights, she has to work mornings, she has to be involved in the audit orders. And I just keep thinking, my gosh, I don't want her to feel guilty because her kids aren't seeing her every day.
That's right. And
It's
those,
that balance that you have to work, and no one can ever really do a whole work-life balance. There's no perfect solution.
that's
There's
right.
not. There never
Yep,
will
and-
be.
That's right. And so the thing that we need to do as organizations is recognize that with dual income couples, you know, it's not just that people, you know, it's a nice to have that both couples work. I mean, it's, you know, it's the reality that we're in today. You know, people need the income. And so both husband and wife work, mom and dad work. And so I think what's key is that this discussion we just had on this topic and the fact of what women go through, we need men to hear that at work as well, right? So they recognize, you know, everything that goes on, because I think, you know, they know what goes on, but until they associate the stories with real people on their teams, it takes a different, you know, a route. Also, another thing that's super important is for companies to enable men to take time off for their own reasons of family caregiving, certainly when their children are born, paternity leave, taking care of elderly parents or, you know, sick and parents. You know, when we allow, and I say allow because we culturally, we promote the idea that men can take time off, that also helps women, right? Because then women aren't going to be penalized because men also are doing the same thing. They won't be penalized as much. So I think that's really important. Okay, so we're going to do one more bias, and then we're going to get into those situational cards, which I think are the most beneficial because we have real good discussions about them. So we're going to cover likability bias. So I'm going to flip over here. We're going to go to the website and we're going to click on likability bias. And so, you know, I like participation. So I'm going to be listening because I'm going to call out a random name here, not of the people who have talked yet. Let's try a person named Anya Goldsmith. I see you out here, Anya. How are you doing today? I'm going to pick on you and ask if you don't mind reading the paragraph that you see on the screen about likability bias.
Absolutely. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Great. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Likability bias. Likability bias is rooted in age-old expectations. We expect men to be assertive, so when they lead, it feels natural. We expect women to be kind and communal, so when they assert themselves, we like them less.
That's right. And we talked a little bit about this. It's so interconnected with the performance bias that we discussed last time. Okay, so now I'm going to ask somebody else. Let me see here. How about Lauren Pluto? I see you're out here. Lauren, do you mind reading just the first paragraph?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Likability bias, also known as the likability penalty, often surfaces in how we describe women. Women are likely to be described as too aggressive or bossy, words rarely used to describe men in the workplace.
Thank you, Lauren. And by the way, you know, I want to mention, Lauren, I think I heard some kiddos in the background. I think the more we feel comfortable talking about that, like right now, my dog is laying on the floor because we have this repairman here and I can't let the dog roam in the house. Well, you know, it's just the world we live in, and we should welcome that our teams are able to multitask, right, and handle difficult situations together. So I think we should talk about it so that people get more comfortable with the fact that things are different. We have to accommodate a lot. We should. Okay, so yes, likability penalty and being called bossy, right? Words rarely used to describe men. You know, I think Sheryl Sandberg is the one that says, you know, we want people to be bossy. We need bosses to lead and to encourage growth. Okay, next paragraph, Jan Jones. I see you out here and I was wondering, can you read the second paragraph for us?
Sure. You may even have caught yourself having a negative response to a woman who has a strong leadership style or who speaks in a direct, assertive manner. This is likability bias at work, and being liked matters. Who are you more likely to support and promote, the man with high marks across the board or the woman who has equally high marks but is not as well liked?
That's exactly right. You know, another way this manifests itself is that you know who is well regarded in the company and who has a lot of credibility and respect. And if that person is talking about not liking somebody who, because she's too bossy, well, you might, again, unconsciously, out of self-preservation, you want to advance and be like yourself. So you're going to go with his opinion and, you know, not rock the boat. Any comments on that specific paragraph on, you know, this notion that, you know, how we actually, you know, women are biased against women, right? Any comments?
I have a comment. So, yeah, I realize that that's occurring and I see myself do that, but it's not just something you can turn off because you've been doing that your whole life. So I think to me, that's where the dilemma lies.
Exactly. And so when I said earlier about micro steps, right? So the little things that we can start doing to turn this around, because it is so hard, it's so hard, right? It's a lifetime of being socialized that this is the norm. And we're like saying, oh, we're not going to do that anymore. It's kind of hard, especially if you're in your company, you're in the minority of whatever it is, right? Your leadership style, your height, your aggressiveness, whatever, then you are already under sort of pressure, right? You don't want to go too far. But one thing you can do is at least begin to remain silent, right? So for example, whereas in the past, you might have shaken your head when somebody said something about those kind of remarks about another woman, you might start out by just remaining silent and not shaking your head, right? And you're resisting really hard. And then over time, you get used to doing that. Then you need to learn, we need to learn, I'm in there too. What are the words I can use to say to interrupt the bias next time it happens, right? And that's where these cards are so helpful because they give you some ideas on the words to use. So let's keep going because the cards that we'll go through has some. Okay, and then the last paragraph, actually there's 2 more paragraphs. So let's try Darlene Jackson. Do you mind reading the 3rd paragraph? Darlene, click yourself off mute. I'm gonna do something, ask to unmute. You should see it. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I messed you up. Okay, there you go, Darlene.
Find the mute button. So to make things more complicated, women must also pay a penalty for being agreeable and nice, which can make people think that they're less competent. This double bind makes the workplace challenging for women. They need to assert themselves and be seen as effective. But when they do assert themselves, they're often less liked and men do not walk the same tightrope.
That's right. Thank you so much.
No problem.
And you can see the image is of this woman and she is teetering on, you know, a tightrope or a bar there and trying to stay balanced because you can't be too nice, but you can't be too strong, right? And so therein lies the challenge that we face. And, you know, back to the comment from Diane about how come, you know, we really want to invite men to these meetings and have them listen is because we want them to understand this. And what I would encourage you to do, if I was doing this in a staff meeting where there's men and women, I want to hear from the men if they believe in this. Do they think that this is a real thing that women are experiencing this? Do they see themselves as participating in this notion that they, you know, make comments that suggest that women shouldn't be assertive as much as a man, and maybe they don't realize what they're saying. So do we have any men who are on the call today? I can't see all the names. Diane, do you see any, or we didn't have any gentlemen join us?
No, I don't see anybody.
Okay. But again, one thing, and now here's Natalie had a comment, men wouldn't admit to this as they probably don't see it as wrong, right? And so I think what we have to do is just have these conversations, right? If a guy was in our meeting, I would want to just talk to him and say, hey, what do you think? Do you think this is true or not? I welcome when people give me alternative points of view. You know, yeah, why, you know, why do you think this doesn't happen? Or, and then maybe we have discussions where somebody gives a specific example rather than talking generalities. I like to bring up my own stories of specific examples, and then we can discuss those facts rather than just talk about generalities. Okay, and then let's wrap it up by doing the last paragraph. How about Vincenza? I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. Vincenza Semino.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, very well. Thank you.
I love saying that. Can you read the last paragraph?
This bias plays out differently, but no less damagingly for women of color. Black women are more likely to trigger this penalty in many workplace contexts because they are more often stereotyped as angry and aggressive. Meanwhile, Asian American women are more often stereotyped as being communal than other groups of women, and this can make people less likely to see them as effective leaders.
Great. Thank you so much for reading that. And so when we talk about what to say, it just occurred to me, the first step in our rehabilitation into what we've been socialized into is to just kind of remain silent and at least not reinforce the behavior that we see. The second part is to come back. So let's say somebody says something about a Black woman and says, man, she is always so angry. What can we do? We could say something like, actually, I enjoy working with Susan, and I think she demonstrates some pretty, assertive leadership skills that we want to see in a leader, right? And you could say something like that, and then you've just dispelled the myth and shown support without saying, oh, you're racist, or, oh, you're, misogynistic or whatever, right? So I think we can do it. It just takes practice. Anybody else have any ideas on what they've said or what they might say? I just thought I'd check with any, I love success stories or examples. Has anybody tried?
I don't have a success story for you, Elba, but I think a lot, I've been thinking about this a lot since the last time we had this meeting, because personally, I have not witnessed any of these outward kind of altercations that, you say somebody will comment, on a Black woman while she's presenting. I have not experienced that at TireHub. I feel like we work with a lot of great people, a lot of respectful, men and colleagues, female alike. But I think a lot of it falls into when it's not an overt or large altercation, or it's not completely obvious what just happened, right? That it's the eye roll or the or the inside joke where people are texting each other while someone is, I just have not seen a lot of the overt, loud or specific altercations out loud. And I think that's where a lot of men miss the boat in understanding what's really happening, because they're like, well, I don't see that. I don't see any of my male colleagues doing that, and I don't do that. But it's the micro pieces that I think affect the most and the most often that get missed and need to be pointed out and addressed in the same way that you just said, like not in a big altercation. Well, yes, in those, but also in the micro situations to point out and speak positively and say, you know what, like pipe down over there, or something along those lines anyways.
Yep. Thank you for sharing. Yes, on the microaggressions, right? And so the simple example we saw today is that someone's on their phone while a woman is speaking. It's possible that you might have a situation where when a man comes, let's say you have a big senior leadership meeting, and as typical, right? All the senior leaders are seated around the table, and in comes the presenter and you present. It would be interesting to video something and to show what happens when a woman comes in. Is she treated differently by the behavior of the room, as simple as more people are on their phone texting versus when a man comes in, right? And of course, the facts get complicated. Maybe the man comes in to talk about a topic that all the people find more interesting than the woman came in, a topic that is, controversial, right? I get that. But those microaggressions, I think it's important to see them and for them to be seen. And what can we do? Well, we can read more, right? Read more about bias and have examples ready so that when somebody says, I don't know what this microaggression thing is, you can give them an example. And the one of the cell phone and texting in the room when the person's presenting is a great example. One other thing I want to say I want to have a little conversation about is that you talked about the fact that in our company that you don't really see any of these big, visible aggressions against Black women. And so what I would challenge us all on is that's a great example of, well, gosh, do I have Black women that I have coffee with and have meetings with? And have I ever asked them, right? Here's a great, I love this one, right? You ask someone, hey, let's say Susan's Black, and you say, hey, Susan, what is a Black woman's experience at TireHub versus a white woman or versus a white man? And then you just listen, right? You just listen, because what you're trying to do is understand that individual's experience, because we might not be seeing it because they aren't out there broadcasting it, because it's this tightrope, right? And you have to always try to be perfect. So I would just suggest that one thing that also we can do is to really listen and ask a person who's different than us to tell us, hey, how is your experience different than mine? How, you don't want to ask a yes, no question, but ask, how is your experience different from mine? And it might help us to understand things we might not really think of. Okay, so thanks for that on likability bias. So now what we're going to do is we are now going to go through these situation cards for the remainder of the time. We're going to go through numerous cards that give us an explanation of a situation that we come in contact with at work, and then what we might do and say to help improve the inclusiveness of our organization. And so I want to cover real quick all the 5 types of activities that are involved, because they're important for you to see in hiring, right? This unconscious bias can be particularly damaging in the hiring process. And so for us to recognize it and speak up to inform our peers and our leaders is important, because it can create a lot of damage. Meeting dynamics. Meetings work best when everyone's voice is heard. We want to find the best idea, but people won't speak up if they don't feel like they're welcome. Women typically get less time to speak and are interrupted more. Companies miss out on good ideas because we associate airtime with influence, right? And if women are speaking less, well, then we associate less influence with women. They're not as important because they're not being heard as often. Everyday interactions, those small everyday interactions can reinforce biases in the workplace and set the right or wrong norms when a woman is called too aggressive, right? Or a mother's commitment to the job is questioned. Reviews and promotions, obviously, upward economic mobility, opportunity to fulfill your leadership capabilities, it happens in reviews and promotions. And bias is one of the reasons why women on average are promoted at lower rates than men. And even a small amount of bias in performance reviews can dramatically impact a woman's chance of promotion. And lastly, in mentors and sponsorship area, that we know they're critical to success, right? Just like we've talked about having those informal interactions with senior leaders, that's how they get to know you, bond with you, and begin to recognize where your skills are. But research shows that people with mentors, they're more likely to be promoted, but we tend to get mentored less. Okay, so let's go through some cards and some situations. So this one is on the reviews and promotions process. So imagine that you're on a review committee and a woman with an excellent track record is up for a promotion. But the group is nervous about giving her the opportunity because no one feels like they really know her personally, right? They haven't had those informal interactions to really bond with her and know her as a person. And therefore they're hesitant to give her the opportunity. So when you rely on personal relationships to decide who gets promoted, you may overlook the most qualified people, right? If one of the decision points is how well you know someone, but yet you don't associate with them, then you might not pick the best person for the job just because you don't know them very well. So why this happens, we tend to gravitate toward people, and since most leaders are men, this can disadvantage women. So, in addition, the outings that happen can exclude women. And so that makes it harder for them to network with senior leaders. For example, evening events may be difficult for parents to attend. On other occasions, women might not be invited at all. And so what do we do in that situation? What do we do when women are not being invited to events where that camaraderie is being built? Encourage the group to consider the woman's full profile, right? So in this case, we're not changing the fact that we want more events or outings. We're saying, hey, when people say that about, hey, I don't really know her that well, then what we can do is encourage the group, the evaluators, to consider the woman's full profile, such as her business results and her effectiveness as a manager, right? And so we would step up and say, hey, let's consider her full profile. Ask why knowing someone personally is important for promotion. And again, this gets tricky, right? You don't want to feel like you're being confrontational, but you can very nonchalantly say, hey, tell me more about why you feel it's important to know someone personally. And then just have a dialogue, a conversation. And that really helps everyone understand, oh, maybe you're right. I don't really need to know that. When people are asked to clarify the evaluation criteria they're using, they tend to make more fair decisions. If they push back, remind them that the personal relationships don't have anything to do with how well she does her job. Any comments or thoughts on this? Have you seen it? Have you been part of it? Where people feel like they need to know you, or just because they don't, that you're not getting opportunity. Any comments on this one? Okay, let's keep going to another. And again, I hope that what you're getting out of this dialogue we're having, again, it doesn't do us any good if we just look at these cards and they just get tucked back in the back of our mind, right? What I want to hope I can aspire you to do and give you the skills to do it by giving you the words you can use is to be brave and start saying the words, right? Start saying these words, be on the lookout for these dynamics that we're seeing, and speak up and teach others by showing them the actions. So here's another one. In a meeting, a client looks and speaks only to the men in the team, right? And again, this is one of those microaggressions that people might not even notice, right? But we are in a big meeting and it seems like the client is only looking at the men in the team, assuming they're the most important people in the room. Why it matters. The slight can seem trivial, but it sends a signal about who matters. In this case, the men. It can also create a dynamic where women miss out on valuable chances to join the conversation and shape outcomes. When this happens, your team isn't able to put their best foot forward. I'm curious if anyone has ever been in this situation where you're in a group and the clients only seem to be talking with the men. We have a yes, right? And so that can be really uncomfortable. Obviously, the best outcome would be if the executive observes this behavior happening and then says to the client, you know, John, you may not have had a chance to work as much with Susan, but she's doing an outstanding job on your account. And I'd like her to actually answer that question for you. You heard what I said, right? The best outcome is for the senior person in the room to say something like that, right? That's what I call a bias interrupter. The leader observes the bias happening, interrupts it in a respectful way, and gives credit and credibility to you. Now, unfortunately, back to Diane's comment and why we need men in the room is because if they aren't aware of those microaggressions and observing it, just like when you don't observe the composition of the meetings you're in, then you don't even know it's happening, right? So several people have said this has happened to them. And so again, I don't know how else to change this, but we need men in these rooms, in these sessions, listening. You know, this is an excellent card right here that would be wonderful to have men participate in so they understand and they can learn what is their opportunity to intervene when the microaggression is happening. And although this relates to a client environment, this can happen in any kind of meeting. It doesn't have to be a client, right? It could just be our peers. It could be one of the bosses, etc. So let's see what they recommend that we do in this case. It says, do your part to make contact with everyone and try to find ways to bring more women into the conversation. When possible, you can pass the baton to a woman in a way that highlights her expertise. So that's what I was saying, right? Susan, you'd be great to answer this question. She's actually our resident expert on the topic. Again, this needs to come from the male or the leader, senior person in the room. But guess what? It doesn't have to. What you can do, another strategy, is that before you go to a meeting, make sure that you partner up with someone that is a collaborator with you, and you can tell the person, hey, listen, this meeting, who knows how it's going to go, but can you please, at the point where I know the answer to something, can you step in and use my name and say, hey, Susan is the expert on this topic. Let's hear her response. It can be a peer. It comes best when it comes from a leader in the room, but you can also work with a peer and tag team it so that you support each other. I'm curious if anybody's tried that before, to pre-trip a meeting and have a partner that's going to work in tandem with you to bring up your name and your credentials to help, change this meeting dynamic. Okay, anyway, that's just another idea.
Hey, Elba, I haven't tried that specific thing, but I can say I've had success using a different technique. If I don't have another advocate in the room for me, and jumping in to speak up for myself can also be pretty effective, right? You have to wait for the right moment in the conversation, but you can also jump in and say, let me jump in here. I think I have some expertise or background that can best address your question, or I'm sorry, maybe we haven't met yet, highlight your title. Things like that can be very effective as well.
Thank you. Definitely. And that's, it's the confidence factor, right? And building yourself up to be prepared to step in and advocate for yourself, right? Definitely. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, this is Jennifer. I'd like to echo, I think that was Janet maybe that shared that comment. But in my past life, it's actually, I've experienced it on two fronts, with me being the senior leader as a vice president. With my counterpart was a male in the room, and my client, they assumed that the male was the VP and I was just the coworker, if you will. And to Janet's point, and then I've been on the opposite end as well, just in a room where it's collaborative. And I too find that being effective by just speaking up when you know that you own that topic, or you have the ability to answer, whatever the question is, just speak up and own it. It's very effective, and essentially kind of sets the tone for the meeting going forward.
Definitely. I agree completely, right? You want to step up and advocate for yourself and demonstrate your knowledge, right? That's what we want people to see us in action, that we're capable and committed to the role.
I've actually done that for another colleague, where I knew the questions would come at me as opposed to even addressing her. So I chatted with her before the meeting to say, I'm going to pitch you this ball, so be ready.
Wow. And, who is that speaking?
This is Tiffany.
Tiffany, thank you for sharing that story. Well, that in fact is the type of behavior that we want, right? We want support from our peers or our bosses to recognize and add credibility to us, because when other people speak on your behalf, it's much more effective. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for doing that, being a true servant leader. Okay, here's another one. A coworker confides in you. Honestly, I just find it easier to work with men. Your colleague's preference for working with men could lead them, consciously or unconsciously, to overlook talented women. When this happens, women can miss career opportunities, and your coworker can miss the chance to work with women whom they might learn something from. Has anyone ever had any peer say this to you? I mean, this takes pretty much a lot of trust for someone these days to say that, right? But I bet that men amongst themselves, when they're with each other, they probably may say something like this, right? They find it easier to work with men, or maybe it's, I find it difficult to work with women. Let's see what this gives us, right? So what do you do? A comment like this may signal that your coworker thinks women are less talented or likable than men. You can ask, hey, what makes you say that? Right? Again, you're not being accusatory. You just want to have a discussion. So again, interrupting these biases in the moment. So somebody says that, you're like, hey, what makes you say that? When people are asked to explain themselves, it leads them to rethink their position. You can also explain why it happens. It can be eye-opening to understand how bias works or to share your own perspectives. You could say, hey, I've had great experiences working with women. Even if you can't convince them to think differently, you have pushed back on their point of view, and it just increases awareness. Okay, let's look at another one. A manager, this is in reviews and promotions. And remember, the research shows us that women have a significant penalty, and it can be very detrimental in reviews and promotions. Even when it's a small thing, it has an oversized impact. A manager describes a woman who reports to her as overly ambitious when she asks for a promotion. When women are criticized for a promotion, it can have a negative impact on her and on the company as a whole. She might miss out on the chance to grow. Other women may hear the message that they shouldn't ask for promotions, and the company misses an opportunity on talented people, right? So what to do? What would you say? Prompt your colleague to explain her thinking. For example, you can say, generally, I think we like ambition as a company. Again, you could say, why does it bother you in this case? And this is interesting because notice how they say bother you in this case. So you're not suggesting that this person is generally thinking this way. She's just saying, hey, why does it bother you in this case? You can also suggest that there's maybe a double standard at work by saying something like, hey, how do you feel when a man asks for a promotion? And if you think women in your workplace are often criticized when they seek promotions, then this would be a good opportunity to say that, right? To start having a conversation about the culture. Any comments on this situation? About being called too ambitious? I'd be curious to hear, have any of you been called too ambitious before by bosses or by peers? Okay, let's go to the next one. Your team is led by a woman. I think this one actually came up, you guys were talking about. Your team is led by a woman, but a colleague from another department assumes that a man on your team is the leader. And so why it matters, it reinforces the idea that women are not leaders. It can also undermine your team leader and her standing in the group. So what do you do? Here's that jump in again, jump into the conversation to correct the record. Hey, Susan is our team lead. You can also say something that underscores her leadership abilities or accomplishments. For example, she heads all our biggest sales efforts. I love when people make specific comments about a person's capabilities, right? So rather than just saying, hey, she's the boss or she's the department manager, you could say something that makes it more specific to the big responsibility that she has. Oh, Susan heads our entire department of more than 400 people, responsible for $200 million in revenue or something like that, right? And so that helps give credibility to the person. Any comments on this one when someone's mistaken for being the person in charge? Okay, let's go on to another one. You're in a meeting to discuss performance reviews, and you notice that men are being described as strategic and visionary, while women are being described as hard workers or good team players. Why does this matter? How we describe people matters, right? Words matter, and it can unfairly influence performance reviews. In this situation, it's not hard to imagine men getting the inside track on promotions and raises when they're consistently being referred to as strategic and visionary, when women are, hard workers or good team players. So this is in performance review. So many of you on this call are senior leaders, and you are in discussions where you're evaluating talent in your organization and deciding who's going to get promotions or special assignments and stretch assignments, right? And so simply paying attention to the words being used and how they're describing men versus women, I think is important. So what to do, point out the pattern, explain why it matters. You can also talk to HR about creating a broad checklist of leadership attributes with concrete examples of what they look like in practice. Expanding the definition of a good leader will help with inclusivity, and use a standardized checklist to evaluate candidates that can help remove bias from the review process. So here I'd like to have a discussion with you, because I was giving you the example of myself and my peer at work and how we are having these discussions about how we view the current talent management system as not a level playing field. And so this particular answer here talks about criteria, right? And what is the criteria? So at my company, we have a program, and it's sort of an advanced leadership program. And we were having a discussion about, well, who decides what the right leadership attributes are, right? And if you look at it, it's probably the highest people in the organization, and they decide, well, this is the kind of leader we're looking for. Well, is the list they come up with based on their own biases about what they think a leader looks like, right? And how a leader acts. And so are there checks and balances that say, hey, wait a minute, how do we come up with that list, by the way? Is that the right list for today's modern time? Is that the right list for this organization at this time? And by the way, when we pick people to join this special program, how did we pick them? Who picked them? Did they use a standardized methodology for calculating and rating people? Did they have multiple raters of diverse backgrounds rating the people? Did they all agree on the exact same rating structure? And how did they communicate the opportunity? So my question to you is, and the discussion I want to have is, you know, at your company or in the companies you've worked at, tell me about how you select leaders and what structures are in place. Do you have a specific rating structure? So I throw this out to you. I just want to know, do you have a specific rating structure and a methodology for selecting people for promotions? Anybody want to comment on that? I don't really see any comments or hear any comments. But I think the key message here is, right, how are you selecting people for promotions, and what can we do as individuals, as leaders and organizations, to add more rigor and transparency and methodology to ensure that things are level, so that everyone competes on a level playing field, right? That's the idea with this one. Okay, here's another one. This is a good one. So someone comments to you that another coworker only got the promotion because she's Black, right? And that's the environment we're in right now. Things can be a little hostile these days because of all of the equity conversations going on. So why this matters? If this idea goes on unchallenged, it reinforces a damaging stereotype about the talent of people from underrepresented groups. Comments like this can foster sexism and racism and make the workplace feel hostile to some employees. And employees are generally less happy in a hostile. And we know that environment. If employees are unhappy, it's impacting the productivity and the ideas and solutions that your company is providing. So if you heard this from someone, and we've all heard it. I mean, I certainly have heard people say that, right? In a moment of seeing people get promoted, they say, all we're promoting are Black people now. You know, all we're promoting are, or no, the one, you know, I'm Hispanic, so I mean, I'm subject to it, right? To me, what they'll say is, oh, you don't have to worry about anything, Elba. You know, you're a minority, you're a double minority, so you're going to get promoted. Right. And so that's where we have to say, we can't let comments like that go. So here's what is suggested. So first, why it happens. People tend to underestimate women's talents, or fill in the blank, right? It can be women, it could be race, gender, it could be difference. You know, the other thing I always tell men is, look, these unconscious biases, they are not just hurting women and minorities. They hurt white men too. If you're a white man and you in any way are different than the majority of your organization, you too will be penalized, because this isn't about even race and gender. What this unconscious bias is about difference. If your organization is full of white men that watch football and talk about football and everything's football, and you don't like football, but you're still a white man, you too will be penalized, right? It's difference. And so here's what they're telling you is that bias can be strong, but especially for women of color, that means that women often have to accomplish more to show that they're as competent as men. And when a woman of color succeeds, some people discount her accomplishments and assume that her success is due to external factors like affirmative action rather than her own hard work and achievements. And so that can be extremely damaging, not just to the individual that's being criticized, but to an entire race of people, right, at the organization. And so what do we do in this very uncomfortable comment situation? We can simply ask, hey, what makes you say that? Again, when you make people aware of something they said in a non-threatening, controversial way, it just makes you sit back and go, wow, I never thought of that, right? Sometimes that's enough to make someone rethink their view, or better yet, stand up for your coworker. I think she got the promotion because she's terrific, right? Or you can say, I think she got her promotion because she's talented. I've worked with her on several projects where I was impressed with her ability and she delivered the goals that we set. You might also take the opportunity to make a larger point about the value of diversity. So you could say, plus, it's good for the company to have more women of color in senior roles because diverse teams tend to perform better. And does anybody, have you been involved in a situation where somebody said something like this? Does anybody want to share where comments made about either, oh, now you have to be Black to get promoted, or you have to be Hispanic, or you have to be a minority? Anybody brave enough to say, have you had anything like that, or no, nobody's saying these kinds of things? Okay, let's go to the next one. Mentorship and sponsorship. So we've talked about how important mentoring and sponsoring is for career advancement. So your manager, who's a man, often meets the men on his team for dinner or drinks, but rarely meets the women outside of work. And of course, this is all pre-COVID, right? Why it matters: friendships at work are valuable. Important relationship building and information sharing happen over coffee or pizza. When people are routinely excluded from outings like these, they can miss out. If a manager is making arrangements, it's especially problematic, right? Because they're in charge and they're inviting only certain people, excluding certain people. Part of their responsibility is to make sure the whole team has equal access to networking opportunities. So what to do? This is your manager. So you have, standing to raise it with them, right? If your manager's doing it, well, you have a reason why, as the team member, you have a conversation about it. So you can say that you've noticed that he goes for drinks with men on the team more often than women. Explain why it matters. You can also offer solutions. If he's uncomfortable going to dinner with women, suggest that you meet everyone for breakfast or lunch. So I'd be curious if you all have experienced this kind of thing where, people are leaving. In the old days when we were still at the office, right? People are leaving and you see them all head out and you didn't get invited, or then you found out the next day they were all together and they, were having an event. So we have one yes. Certainly it has happened to me, right? And it doesn't feel any worse than the next time, the next day or the week later, they're talking about, oh, at dinner the other night, and you're like, oh, what dinner? I wasn't invited, right? And they got all this inside information because we know that happens. You start talking, you say you're going out after work, but work is what glues us together. So it definitely does happen. So again, I'm curious if anyone has ever confronted the situation and what the outcome was of that. What success or non-success you had when you raised the issue of this happening. Anybody have any stories? I think the key to all of this, though, I hope you're seeing a pattern, which is that we have to interrupt the bias and we have to practice what to say at the moment it happens. And by asking what and how questions, by saying, hey, why, what makes you say that? Or, hey, I heard that that you all went out for dinner. Next time, please invite me. I'd like the opportunity to get to know you all better. Something like that. Okay, let's look at another one. You realize that a colleague who mentors a man, who is a man, only mentors other men. Okay, why it matters. Mentorship can be critical to success. We all benefit when a colleague shows us the ropes or sponsors us for new opportunities, particularly when that colleague is more senior. If your coworker only mentors men, the women he works with are missing out on his advice, potentially on opportunities to advance. He is also missing out on their best thinking. So what do we do if we notice that an important leader is only mentoring men? Talk to your colleague, explain why mentoring is so valuable, and share your observation that he only mentors men. Recommend he mentor at least one woman and offer to help him identify a few promising candidates. If he confides that he's uncomfortable being alone with women, point out that there are plenty of public places to meet and remind him that mentorship really matters. Now, today, thanks to the silver lining of COVID, that's no longer an excuse, right? Because between whether you use Teams or the Adobe Acrobat, the Adobe application or Zoom or whatever, it is now possible to have mentoring and avoid the transportation and the being alone thing, right? So I think here, one of the most valuable things we can do as leaders is one leader, go to another leader and bring them a mentee and say, hey, listen, Joe, you have such a great reputation. The people who've been mentored by you are so successful. There's the woman on my team, or there's a woman on, Sandy's team who has so much potential. Would you be willing to mentor her for a 3-month engagement, every 3 weeks or whatever? And we bring them an opportunity to mentor a woman, right? So that would be one way, without judging them or without making them feel bad that they're only mentoring men. Just forget the men thing. Just say, hey, could you mentor this person? I'd like to know if anyone has advocated for a woman to be mentored by a man. Anyone had an experience like that?
I would say, I haven't. I think mentorship can be very informal unless your company has a formal program set up. And usually those that are mentored on a formal program are just, a few people. So I think that you may not be able to see this all the time, but you have to really have your eyes open for it because it's informal.
Yeah. It can also be, it's a great point, but to be informal, it can also be a little more structured. And I find a lot of times that that men in particular don't want to be involved in a mentorship because it's so unclear what it is, right? It's like, oh Lord, they want me to mentor her. Is it going to be like every week? Is it going to be an hour every week? What is it? But what I find is I've just made this little 1-pager of a mentoring program where it's like 3 months. So it's got a start date and an end date, right? And so then people don't feel like they're, oh my gosh, this is going to last a year. Every other week, 30 minutes, recurring meeting, and the mentor doesn't have to do anything except show up, right? And they have this dialogue. So I think it would help to make it a little more structured, even though it's informal, because absolutely, Diane, formal trainings programs, number one, they're expensive and they can be very time consuming. Okay, meeting dynamics. You notice that the same woman is always asked to take notes at your weekly meeting, right? So this is an administrative task every meeting. It's always the same woman. When people take notes, they're effectively taken out of the conversation, right? When you have to take notes, think about, no matter what, even for personal reasons, the minute you're taking notes, you lose your ability to really participate in the conversation. They aren't able to contribute meaningfully, and the group misses out on their insights. Diverse teams are often more innovative and productive, but you can't reap the full benefits of a diverse team if you don't hear from all of its members. So I think, Natalie says, ha ha ha, I've been that woman, right? Haven't we all probably? And so this is another great one that is pretty easy to interrupt the bias in the moment. I mean, this isn't a super controversial thing, right? Someone's taking notes. So for this one, I think we can all do this, and I think that we need to, but it starts with being observant and recognizing what's happening, right? Having our eyes and ears open. Why it happens? Due to age-old stereotypes, people expect women to be more giving than men and to accept lower level tasks. Secretarial tasks also tend to be seen as women's work. As a result, women are asked to do more office housework, like taking notes, like ordering the food for a meeting, like planning a birthday party, like planning a retirement party. Does those sound familiar? I've been at the end of all of those examples. So then what do we do, right? Kathy says sounds very familiar. Okay, what to do? At the start of the next meeting, suggest that everyone take turns taking notes each week. If you notice a colleague regularly asking only women to take notes, pull them aside and let them know you've noticed this trend and suggest mixing it up. Now listen, sometimes you don't want to bring up the race card or the gender card, right? Depending on the culture, depending on the relationship with people. This example, though, is so easy not to even bring that up, right? All you can say is, hey, I've noticed that you're always asking Susan to take notes. You don't have to say, I notice you only asking Susan, who's a woman, to take notes. Just say the name, right? Or I notice we're always asking the same two people to take notes. I have a suggestion so that we can allow everyone to be more engaged in the conversation, because we want to hear from everyone. Let's start a rotation where every meeting we have a different person take notes. What do you think about that? Right? Has anybody ever challenged this note-taking situation? Again, I'm looking for some stories on what worked and what didn't work.
Yes, in my past work life, not at TireHub, but I was pretty much immediately shut down and told, well, I'm the boss and what I say goes here, and basically, too bad, deal with it. I don't really care what you have to say. So,
oh my God.
Basically, if you don't like your job, there's 10 other people who will take it. So,
oh, that is so tough. So here's, in a situation like that, man, that's tough. And so clearly you left the company, right? The culture just isn't good. And that's so sad because companies are missing out on ideas. Another alternative is depending on the people in the room. Just like we talked about before, where you can, before the meeting, you pre-trip it, right? And you could get with your peers, or even if there are other leaders, you can get with them separately, not expect the boss to do it, but you all do it. And you say, hey, look, let's start a rotation program. And, I don't want to be doing this every time, can you all be willing to share the note-taking job and then see what happens? And right. And then if none of your peers or anybody wants to help, then you're definitely in the wrong culture, the wrong company. Anybody else have any stories on the note-taking or party planning? It's another one that I always used to annoy me. Okay, well, guess what? We're to the closing activity. So the first thing I want to say is I hope that you're finding these examples and the actions and the words that they're suggesting, that they're practical. One thing, Diane, I definitely want to talk to you about getting some feedback when we're all done. I'd like to hear from people. I can do a survey and send it to you to see if what is your opinion on these types of practical applications. Do you think they're practical, right? Because I want to give the team feedback who developed the program as well. And then second is, I want to know, can you commit to do two things? One is doing something, just like we talked about, even observing behaviors, you know, trying to interrupt biases, but also sharing this information among your teams, both at the, you know, regular level and among the leadership level. I would like to see you using this to improve your culture and to improve the opportunities that can be given to everyone equally, including white men. So in closing, again, I want you to think of a one action. And what I'd like to challenge you is to put it in the chat. Let's put in the chat just one thing that you can commit to doing, maybe from some of the things that we talked about today in the cards that we reviewed, or in the bias that we reviewed, right? We talked about likability bias. Let's have, if you don't mind, in the chat in our last remaining minutes, just make a comment on maybe what's one thing that you can do. Speak up in meetings and be more assertive. Challenge a biased comment. And now we've given you some ways to, you know, maybe tackle that. Maybe you can, you know, have a discussion with your boss or a peer, to just say you even came to this meeting, right? Somebody said point out in discussions. Being a tactful bias interrupter more often, especially with microaggressions. I like that, Nicole. I like that language. I'm going to copy that. Tactful bias interrupter, right? We just need to think about this as just, I don't know, I think of it as team engagement and team inspiration, right? How do we just have talks with our team? Decline to plan the next party. I love that. That is another tactic, right? You can say, hey, you know, I did the last one. Maybe John, now where you could really alert people to gender bias without ever saying gender bias is that if you're asked to do something that you say, hey, you know, I did that last time, let's have Joe do it and pick a man, right? And you never had to say that it's anything to do with gender. Pick the man's name and then look at the reaction on the person's face, right? Do they immediately go, oh, that's a woman's job, John's not going to do it, right? But have the dialogue. Well, why not? John can't do it. And keep asking questions, and then you can really see where that goes, right? Anybody else have any things that they can commit to? How about review this presentation deck in a couple of weeks and make sure that it's fresh on your mind and that you can help prepare for 2021. I think 2021 is our comeback year, right? Our year of growth. So in closing, I just hope that you have been able to take this practical information and that you'll be able to apply it. I'm always here. I know we've concluded our 2 sessions. I hope that you can email me, contact me if I can ever be of help to you. If I can help you find the cards again so that you can share with your team and your leaders, I'm glad to give you examples of how you can take this to the next level. Thank you, Lauren. You shared one more comment to point out the individual's work accomplishments and what they've done for the company rather than people say they don't know the person that well, right? Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you, everybody. Diane, do you want to have some closing remarks?
Yes, I do. First of all, Elba, I want to thank you very much for the couple of sessions that you worked with TireHub on, even though sometimes we're not saying stuff or writing stuff into the chat. I can guarantee you we're processing it and thinking about it and, you know, really kind of charting out our course as we move forward. So I really want to thank you for that. I also wanted to request the recording because I do want to advocate for putting this out in our LMS system to so everybody in TireHub can actually see this and participate even if it's not live. So
that's absolutely. I'm happy to provide the video.
Okay,
And
thank you.
everyone will have the video link for the first one too.
Mhm.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Happy holidays. Enjoy the rest of the year, and get some rest, and let's come back reinvigorated to tackle 2021.
Okay,
Bye,
thanks, Alba.
everybody. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, hold on.